Good morning. It's 2:17 p.m. on April 26, 2021. In 2001, immediately after the September 11th attacks, I composed a website and it was put online within, I believe, 72 hours, but at least 5 days of the September 11th terrorist attacks. It was a sort of parody of the Office of Homeland Security as it had been announced at that time. It was very concise, it was only a few pages. And in the manner in which the response was coordinated, not only by me, there were two other people who assisted me. I did the construction of the website. They assisted with other things in terms of recommendations and, shall we say, messaging. But I did the composition of the website myself and kept it very minimal and included a variety of sections with an understanding that because of what was actually happening with the September 11th attacks, that there was a significant trauma that was occurring for people that were involved in some form of political organizing or efforts to express their rights to assembly, as well as a unfolding of a paradigm that was going to also provide considerable terror that was being orchestrated by state actors and by people enabled by the state. And so the manner in which it was pursued was in a form of parody. And one of the things that it did is it found what had been reported at the time as a radio broadcast that was being promoted on loudspeaker in Afghanistan. At the time, immediately after September 11th attacks, there was a retinue of vehicles that were going through the streets of various cities in Afghanistan, specifically at this point Kabul, and they were broadcasting over the loudspeaker this message that was meant to, one could say, tell people, hey, you have to let people know if they are engaged with this, they have to turn themselves in or we will pursue them. But the manner in which it was presented was meant to be very authoritative and was meant to be very terrorizing. And so what I did as part of this, I came up with a kind of counter positioning of the message. I said, put it on the website and put it in this concept of, well, if you take to the streets, here is a message that's been approved by the government and that has been used elsewhere and can provide a template or a foundation for how you would engage with your local community in order to fight terrorism. On the site was also a list of what I had identified as America's 10 most wanted terrorists. And there were 10 people that were listed as terrorists, including domestic terrorists within the United States of America, who had a extensive history of activities that would, as I understood by their own terms, qualify as terrorism. Another thing that was on this website was a analysis of or an understanding of the manners in which terrorism had to that point been defined. And the question was posed, if you take out the specific references, including to the specific ethno-national group or the specific religious affiliation, but just leave the general accusation and then understand it can be applied to a variety of tendencies. The question then becomes one of this is how the United States has characterized terrorism, and insofar as this is the way that the United States has characterized terrorism, consider the list of 10 most wanted terrorists accordingly. Now, this website was up for a while. My understanding is that it was actually seen by people internationally. It was seen by people internationally as well as domestically. But within 60 days of the website being put up, it just disappeared. And the server it was actually hosted on a private server by somebody who was involved in internet technology. But it just disappeared and nobody wanted to talk about it. Well, it's persisted. It's come up here and there in different ways over the years, but I've noticed it most notably in the last few years. And what happened, as I understand, is somebody believing that they had some sort of national security authority took it down and decided they were going to use it for their own purposes. And in the course of that, they attempted to frame people. That's kind of how terrorism works, especially state-enabled terrorism. A big problem emerged in March of 2016. I did not know at the time what the causal factors were. But I was in a domestic violence shelter and I was witness to an act of intentionally orchestrated genetic engineering. I was understanding at the time that what had happened was there had been a very large scale comprehensive radio frequency manipulation that was being broadcast in the area in which I was at that time. And I actually saw how it was being accomplished. And the understanding was that it was doing something in a manner to identify people genotypically and to ascribe certain genotypical characteristics with attributes, including what were supposed to be behavioral cues that were supposed to also be connected to performance indicators. And that the manner in which somebody was demographically typified would then identify a systematology through which one could then assess their compliance regarding their intercession with what was supposed to be the authority. My understanding at the time, especially based on other things that were happening, was that this was actually coming from the federal government up to and including the level of the White House, and may well have even been initiated and engaged by advisors to the president, allegedly around national security, and under the auspices that it was somehow being done as part of some sort of compact or confederation with others outside of the authority of the American federal system. Sometime later, I found Executive Order 13721 of March 14th, 2016, developing an integrated global engagement center to support government-wide counterterrorism communications activities directed abroad, and revoking Executive Order 13584. This is exactly what I saw. And what I ended up realizing sometime later, when I first did my assessment of this, is what they done is they invoked certain pre-existing protocols that were already codified in various executive orders, as well as policies connected to certain departments. And they took the different departments and they identified them with a sort of ethnic characteristic in some manners that correlated with what the identified ethnography or ethnographic profiling was for the people in charge, or the individual in charge of that specific department. And they created a form of programming that actually engaged people based on stimulation of genetic indicators in their actual DNA. They've already done enough analysis, they've already done enough testing of what they understand to be the capacity to use radio frequency to attempt to trigger the indication or the proportion or dispersal within somebody's specific understanding of genotyping to assess whether or not they demonstrate what they've identified as the behavioral characteristics of that specific ethnic group. And depending upon your demographic affiliation, your demographic identity, there are options that are open to you. But the pursuit and the success of your pursuit of those options is primarily dependent upon your demonstration of compliance with behavioral cues that are both engaged by the people you're engaging with, but then also are supposed to be demonstrated by the manner in which you're prompted to respond to a variety of environmental stimuli. This was going on. I saw them do it. And I was very upset because in the course of doing that, what they were doing is they were laying down a process for political engineering. And after this happened, my encounters with the people in that specific shelter and actually in the network overall completely changed. Now, when I was doing my investigations of Executive Order 13707 and its application in Health and Human Services Network, I did not specifically reference this at the same time, because this was the kind of thing that took some time to actually be able to prove. But I believe that the Obama administration specifically engaged this and engaged it in concert with some contractor that agreed to code it to actually provide a form of genetic resequencing in order to try to literally alter people's genetic structure to respond to pre-programmed operationalizations depending upon the options that were available to them when it came to their resource access and management. And this has been going on to this day. I bring this up because just recently on the website for the Department of State in the Office of the Inspector General is currently provided an audit dated for March of 2021. Some of it has been, not a very substantial part of it even, has been redacted. Management assistance report remote missions face challenges maintaining communications with locally employed staff and host country government officials. One of the things it talks about here is it goes in, it talks about the hiring, it talks about the context. But my understanding is that what they're actually talking about when they refer to remote missions is the compliance of those in the areas with the programming. That what they're talking about in this audit as well as another audit from March of 2021. In conjunction, especially with other things that have been going on at the beginning of this year, is they're actually putting a very, very major audit security benchmark report on assessments that people in other countries who have been attempted for genetic programming into a specific kind of behavioral characterization that would also, perform functions in their localities based on being remotely generated or directed into certain kinds of performance. Well, they're not doing what they're expected to do. Now, I've evaluated just the initial page of this, but the thing is, in last year, I went through several audits that were provided by the Department of State in the last 20 years. And one of the things that is evident is these discussions specifically about employees are not necessarily referring to people that are literally, directly, identifiably, and demonstrably officially cataloged as actual employees of the Department of State. This is absolutely obvious, especially when they're talking about the relationship between the Department of State and various radio frequency programs or centers for radio transmissions in other countries. And my concern is that what is happening is they're trying to rework it and they're trying to recapitulate this genetic engineering regime in order to recode people to provide different kind of financing. There has been no follow-up to the audit from the Office of the Inspector General from October 2019 regarding the problems with billing and with the circulation that I understand is literally the means by which COVID-19 is being financed. There's been no notice so far as I've been able to find of anything regarding the relationship with translators and the refusal to even acknowledge the billing that happened during that time frame. And there certainly hasn't been any punishment or any restitution for the resulting fraud. Not only that, there has been a very significant indication that past efforts alleging to use the auditing process through the Department of State in order to provide a check against abuses or to provide some third-party monitoring of events to assure compliance with necessary laws was intentionally violated merely to provide an outlay on using the Department of State to abuse office and to commit, through the Department of State, crimes that are completely unconscionable and that are unacceptable from any country, but especially from the United States of America. I'm bringing this to your attention now. I will be moving forward on what this implies and what this implicates, but I'm very, very disturbed because during the time frame this is happening, this audit was put forth. As one can see, if you look through my videos and if you look through what I've been doing in terms of public reporting and trying to respond, that there have been at least 2 instances where very, very major weapons deals have corresponded with a variety of other factors that are absolutely demonstrative of a pattern that legally qualifies under the definition of coercion regarding American laws on trafficking. At the same time, the context around which we are combating trafficking has actually been defaulted on, at the least, if not intentionally manipulated, in order to provide people abusing political office with the opportunity to actually engage acts of trafficking and use reporting on past efforts to combat trafficking as insurance to get away with it now. I'm concerned that this audit is exactly that. Now, I have not read through the whole thing. I will be reading through the whole thing. But insofar as an understanding is that there was a call out for staff and for specifically the ambassadors and the staff of the ambassadors in other countries to be stateside right now, and then for other movements to be being made right now, connected to people who are in the United States from other countries to basically pack up their operations and go back with a one-time offer of not being subjected to any sort of undue reproach, that this is an absolute emergency, imminent situation that needs to be attended to. If, as I have alleged, there has been a process where for going on over 5 years now, the United States, through the alleged counter-terrorist operationalization, has been manipulating radio frequency to engage acts of genetic engineering, including in manners that are anticipating that they will be able to accomplish the methodology by which to create people in some sort of remotely programmed combat role without any sort of verification and or in manners that would attempt to compel them into cooperating with illegal activity And this is an international security threat at the highest level. This is not acceptable for anybody to perform or to do, and it brings up very significant questions that are still outstanding about the intent and the complicity of the gubernatorial commission, specifically in Texas, around biotechnology, bioengineering, and nanotechnology, as well as biomedicine, and how that has to factor into events immediately leading up to September 11th, 2001. Again, we need to have an accurate understanding of what was discussed during the closed door session with Congress concerning alleged intelligence recruitment efforts in the summer of 2000. This is not something to relent on because these areas are not covered in any justifiable manner under the rubric of an acceptable national security paradigm. And if what they are, as I suspect and allege, is actually a perpetuation of an intentionally orchestrated campaign of infiltration of the American government so that it can be intentionally undermined, so that it can then be forced privatized, including in consideration of the fact that the actual property of and as the American people has been allowed to be forced collectivized so that it can be auctioned off as part of somebody's consideration of their private largesse. And we have a serious, serious problem, and it demands immediate response. This audit should be an understanding to anybody in the know, especially anybody that is involved in technology or any industry or even any government sector responsible for any sort of actual national defense matters. This is evidence of a very, very significant crime. There needs to be an appropriate response, and that response needs to assure that first and foremost, that whatever the possibilities are for these events to allow for a recapitulation of international activities to exacerbate the threats to American national security are disengaged. There also needs to be an understanding of and an assessment of what, if anything, this has to do with the JASTA legislation that happened during the Obama administration. And if these two things were intentionally coordinated in order to aid and abet what I allege right now is a paradigm wherein there is not an actual demonstrable constitutional command authority in the United States under the auspices of an actual election, but that rather we have more than one, perhaps as many as 4 or 5 individuals developing their own particular systematology to compete for an illegitimate command that is intentionally undermining the government. It is 2:34 p.m. on April 26, 2021.